Hi, Mark. How's it going? Hi, guys. Welcome back to the Fishing Sandra Live Show. Glad you guys to be able to tune in. I have a really special guest coming on tonight. Really excited to have him on. So, without any further introductions, my guest tonight is a bass angler. Runs in the pro series of bass fishing and a lot more other stuff he does. So without any further introductions, I'd like to bring on Joey Ford onto the show.
Hey, man.
Hi,
Hey,
Joey.
bud. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Nice. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome, bud. I appreciate what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. So for anyone who doesn't know you, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Joe Ford, full-time guide, tournament angler, fishing a few different series around Canada and in the U.S. And yeah, pretty much everything bass fishing related.
Oh, nice. So one of the things we're going to talk about, I noticed that you won your tournament this past weekend.
Yeah, we it was tough. We fished a little invitational social distance tournament on Lower Buckhorn. My partner Brian Bickle and I, we went out there. We didn't really have a lot of time to practice, and there were some pretty heavy sticks out there, and we just lucked into a couple of key bites, and it was really tough. I lost a big smallmouth. Little after noon, and then we went into an area, and I had a big one jump over my bait on the surface, and then we went to another little area, and Brian caught a big one, and I said, well, let's run back and check out that one that missed the lure. Maybe it'll bite. And as we were coming out of the area, you never give up on your cast. Never give up. Just keep your lure in the water. And the most amazing thing happened. I caught a 4.5 pound smallmouth in like a foot of water in a slop mat, like slop, greasy, slimy.
Wow.
Yeah, so we had 3 fish up until then, and then we ended up putting 2 big ones in the boat. And I think on a good day, that wouldn't have been enough weight to really beat those guys out there. But it was such a grind that, we those 2 bites were key. And I've been competing for a long time, and when you lose a big fish like that, when you're struggling and you're having a really rough go, it's so important to keep your focus, right? I had to I had to shut my brain off and just keep fishing what was ahead of me, hoping that we'd get another bite. And it paid off. We got 2 more big bites, and we missed one big one, but it was enough for the win.
Nice. I had fished Florida buckhorn. It's a great lake to fish.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. I hadn't been there a long time. I used to fish on the Canadian Fishing Tour, and they always had a tournament there, and that was like a long time ago. And then there's been several other tournaments go there, but just being such a small body of water, it's hard to hold a big field of boats. And
yeah,
I think the last one I did there was a Canadian Bass Angler Federation joint event with like 80 boats, and it's a really diverse lake. There's big smallmouth, and they relate to like deep weed transition, and there's great largemouth fishing, and it's got everything from like sand and rock to lily pads and deep weed lines, and current plays a big factor. So remember that. Like if you're ever on a lake in the Kawarthas, for any of you guys that are listening, it's really important. Every lake in the Kawarthas is between a series of dams. There's a dam between Lower and Upper Buckhorn, and there's a dam between the other end of Lower Buckhorn and Stony Lake or Clear Lake or whatever. And it's the same with Rice Lake. The Otonabee River in Peterborough's got current at the far end, and Hastings got current. But like if we go into these droughts where we don't have a lot of water, if you're ever out there banging your head off the side of your boat and you can't get a bite, it could be that they've stopped the flow, because there's a natural flow of water that travels through the entire Trent Severn, and it's all part of a watershed that starts in Lake Huron and Georgian Bay and travels south all the way through Lake Simcoe, through the Trent Severn, through the Kawarthas, into the Bay of Quinte and out into Lake Ontario, eventually going out to the St. Lawrence River and the St. Lawrence Seaway into the ocean. And that's kind of the circle of water. So it's pretty interesting when you start to think about it, and how, fish relate to current and how they need current to, to function. And it's like, it's a major pressure change when that current's not there. It's a huge pressure change. So just something to be mindful of.
Yeah. My buddy Chris Comet, he's like, I was also out on Lower Buckhorn this weekend. I saw you boys out there.
Good to meet you, Chris. You should have yelled over. Get off my spot.
Yeah, he's been out there for the last 2 weekends, or 3 now.
Tough life in Chris's world.
It's actually pretty fun. The last time I was up there, I caught my second musky.
Nice.
Up there.
So there's a lot of them there. We caught 2 big ones when we were practicing with flipping jigs.
Oh, wow.
Yep, big ones.
Now, do you have any advice on how you would fish that lake?
How I'd fish Lower Buckhorn?
Yeah.
Well, one, I'd pay attention to the current. 2, it's the kind of lake that you can fish. If you have the luxury of being in a boat with a trolling motor and you can move around, there's a lot of stuff that's really close together. So you could start on a deep weed line that's pretty close to shorelines, and inside that weed line you'll run into sand and rock. So you can fish 2 or 3 different patterns down the same stretch until the fish tell you what they want to do, right? Like, I could be going down flipping a Texas rig, or a big worm or a jig or something down the 8 to 12 foot deep weed. And if I'm not getting bit, I can slide in shallow and maybe throw a square bill crankbait or a topwater bait. And, if that doesn't work, I can roll back out deep and try something a little different. Or I can get into some of the channels and get around the shoals. But everything's very close together, so you don't want to be limited. You don't want to just be the guy, with one bait in your hand because you caught a big bass on it last year. You want to have a bit of diversity, right? Think of the water in like 3 different columns, right? The fish are going to be in 3 different columns. They're going to be on the feed shallow cruising, or they're going to be on the feed on deep weed lines. And deep weed lines are always adjacent to some kind of transition, whether it's sand or whether it's rock or whether it's sand and rock. So being mindful of all of those transitional changes. Bass fishermen, the worst thing a bass fisherman can do, the absolute worst thing, in my opinion, and what kills most fishermen is, we're notorious for fishing off of our memory. I got to go to that tree because I got a big one there 4 years ago. I got to go to that sand because last year I was catching lots of smallmouth on it, And a lot of times that mentality can work and can reproduce because chances are those fish are using, the same areas, they're higher percentage areas. But I'll promise you there's no such thing as a secret spot that just the guides and the pros know about. There's no such thing as the honey hole. Fish, they move around. I heard Bob Izumi once say that fish are like cattle. Smallmouth bass are like herds of cattle. Yeah. You got to think of like a smallmouth being no different, or a largemouth being no different than you or I. From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, all we want is to be comfortable, right? If it's too hot out, we got to take a layer off, find some shade, cool off. If it's, if we're trying to, if we go to eat our dinner, we're not sitting in a dark kitchen, right? We're out where we can see what's going on. Like they're just like us. If you start to think like, what would I do right now? 9 times out of 10, that's going to show you a clue to where you can catch a fish or get a bite. So hopefully that helps. But really, just be diverse and just more than anything, have fun. Like really, just have fun. Fish your string.
Yeah, I noticed that. That's like me. I've been up at Lower Buckmore a couple of times, and there's a couple of spots we keep going back to because we either caught fish at that spot or either they caught fish at that spot. So that's some great advice to know. One thing you did mention, you mentioned Bob Izumi. I noticed you were fishing with him on Lake Fort and Rice Lake on one of the videos I've seen on YouTube.
Yep. Yeah, a couple years ago, Bob and I decided to film a 2-part show for his series, The Real Fishing Show, which for me, like he was my hero growing up. Like I'm 40 years old right now, and I can tell you, when I was like 6 and 7, I used to sit down Saturday mornings, turn on Global. We had a tube TV with 3 channels, and there was none of this satellite dish and high-speed internet and YouTube. And I can remember eating my Cheerios, watching Bob Izumi. So when, we fished against each other he's been at the game. He's a legend, but I've been around Bob for almost 20 years, and he, when we were linked together and somebody said, hey, why don't you do Joe's a guide in Texas. He's been doing guide trips on Lake Fork. And Lake Fork, for those of you who don't know, is it's a trophy lake. Like it's a flooded reservoir. It's got giant bass. It holds like 43 of the 50th biggest bass caught in Texas. So Bob came down and we filmed. Unfortunately, in Texas, we hit some really bad weather and pretty nasty weather pattern, and we didn't catch the fish we were hoping to, and we only had a little short window of time to film. But when we came up to Rice Lake to finish the show, we beat on them pretty good. We caught a wide variety of species. We got walleye, smallmouth, largemouth, and I got to end the show with a pretty good sized musky that jumped on camera, and it was a lot of fun. And through that relationship and fishing and being able to kind of go after my dreams and do what I, have an opportunity to do what I love to do for a living, and meeting guys like Bob Izumi, and, I'm fishing with one of my closest buddies in the world right now, Brian Bickle, and, it's fishing brought us together. And this is a guy that, he's won 3 Stanley Cups with the Chicago Blackhawks. So I feel pretty blessed that I've had an opportunity to meet the people that I've met and build the relationships that I met. It's a wonderful sport. It's not a sport to get rich at, but it's something that I really love. And with the guide business, I get to share something really special with the world. And when I go on tour and I fish some big tournaments, it's pretty fun. And having built that relationship with Bob Izumi, I was asked to represent Canada at several international events. So I know you had my Sean McCall on your show not too long ago.
Yes. So
Sean's one of my best friends. Before fishing, I grew up with Sean. We went to high school together, and when I got to pick my partner to go to Florida for the first Pan American and represent Team Canada, I picked Sean, and we fished the Worlds together. And there were some scheduling conflicts, so I ended up fishing with Brian Bickle at the. We fell into the alternate position at the Cornwall event, and with that, we were allowed to go to the Pan American in Mexico, which just happened this past February, and we won gold, bronze, and silver. So,
nice.
Yeah, we went to Mexico. Team Canada represented well, and so the team from Cornwall last year, the Pan American that was in Cornwall and St. Francis, 3 teams were chosen from that roster to go to this year's World Championships in South Carolina. It's been postponed because of the pandemic. And the team from Mexico's Pan American, 3 teams have been chosen to go to Portugal for the World Championships. So competitive competition's really growing. And, if it wasn't for waking up and eating Cheerios at 8 in the morning and watching Bob Izumi on Global, I wouldn't be here right now. He's the reason I run the greatest bass boat on the planet. I run a Ranger boat. It's it's the most superior rig going, and It's the safest ride, the most comfortable, and that's all Bob Izumi's fault. So he'd laugh at me say that.
We had a comment from Jamie. What other lakes would you recommend in the Kawarthas with a strong fishery?
Lakes in the Kawarthas with a strong fishery. Okay, so I was fishing today with a guy, and he asked me a very, very similar question. And it's kind of a loaded question because they're all good. I think they all are special in their own way. Like, I know Rice Lake early in the season, largemouth can school up shallow, and you can find the right area and catch lots of largemouth. And then, a few weeks into the season, the big smallmouth start to cruise around on sandbars, and that can be fun. The same can be said for fishing on shamong, pigeon, buckhorn. But the Kawarthas are very interesting. So the further south you are in the Kawarthas, you're into like a lot of vegetation, a lot of slop and lily pads. And then the further north you get on that map, you start running into pieces of the Canadian Shield. That's why lakes like Stony and Lower Buckhorn and the top of Pigeon, the top of Shamong, the top of Sturgeon, those lakes are all very, very rocky. But you go to the bottoms of those lakes, like the bottoms of Pigeon and Sturgeon and Scoobog, they're like swamps. They look like you're in Lake Okeechobee in Florida. They're standing bulrushes and pencil reeds and lily pads and milfoil and muddy bottoms. So it's really interesting. So you almost have to pick, like, you want to go catch smallmouth one day, because then I tell you, like, go up into the North Kawarthas somewhere and fish around the rocks, and you'll catch a lot of, the numbers will be up. You'll catch a lot of 2 and 3 pounders. If you want to have a really good largemouth day, tie on a topwater frog and some flipping baits and head south, like fish the bottom of Pigeon Lake, or fish, some of the stuff on sturgeon. And it's just really, they're so diverse. And I'll tell you, all the lakes I've fished in the world, everywhere I've been, Ontario has a little piece of everything. That's the coolest part about our fishery. I share this a lot when I do public speaking engagements. 25% of the world's freshwater is in Ontario, Canada. That's a huge number. So you can imagine there's like 100,000 bodies of water. There's lakes and rivers and streams. So there's, the state of Texas, there's only one natural lake in the entire state, but it's one of the most well-known bass fishing states in the world. And that's part and parcel because they have a bigger population, and bass fishing is a lot bigger business. But it's no joke up here. Like, I caught an 8-pound smallmouth on Lake Simcoe last year.
Oh, wow.
That was a really big deal fish, right? There was one other fish bigger caught that I knew of, and that was, I had the videos on my Facebook page. You can check it out. It was an absolute giant. But I've looked at fish on Lake Simcoe that were bigger than that. So they're all good, to answer your question. All the lakes are good. You just got to hit them at the right time, because there's not ever going to be a perfect science. You might think, man, I'm going to go to Pigeon today and I'm going to crack them because the weather's awesome. It's amazing. And then you get there and it's like, what happened? And it could be a million things. The wind shifted directions. There's overcast. There was a cold front. It could have been that a major thunderstorm ripped through the day before, and now they've had a major pressure change, and the lake got 2 inches of rain, and that changed everything. So, there's so many variables in fishing. That's why I love it, because when you figure something out, it's that much more rewarding.
Yeah. And Steve Shaw comment. He asked, what are your thoughts on competitive fishing becoming an Olympic sport?
I'm a huge fan, and that's why I'm wearing, wrong side. That's why I'm wearing this. That's the official logo of Canada Bass. So Canada Bass was we formed Canada Bass, and we formed, I sit on the board of directors, the Canadian International Sport Fishing Association, and that's the international governing body that organizes our international fishing. So the two governing bodies that facilitate international fishing competitions, whether it's fly fishing, saltwater fishing, bass fishing, kayak fishing, they're making a strong move towards becoming an Olympic sport. And some of you might not know that 100 years ago, fishing was part of the Olympics. Like it was. Spear fishing was part of the Olympics. It was a big piece of it. So the interesting thing is fishing is an activity that's shared by people all over the world. It's not just bass fishermen. Like my love is bass fishing. I'm a competitive bass fisherman. I love to compete. I love to take people bass fishing. I love that there's an infinite amount of ways to catch a bass. But some people feel the same way that I feel about musky fishing or fly fishing or float fishing in the rivers and creeks. So when you start to separate fishing, it's like rock and roll. Like you've got rock and roll, and then you've got all your subgenres of rock and roll, right? You've got hard rock, soft rock, you've got alternate, you've got punk rock. Fishing's a lot like that with all these little subgenres of fishing. So we've formed an international governing body. I wish I could give you more information on, you know, the when and the whereabouts, other than we're representing Canada. We're going to these international competitions. We're fishing against the best guys in the world. Like Team USA, I mean, like we fish against Scott Martin and David Dudley and Brian Latimer and Mark Daniels Jr. and Mark Rose and like all the top guys you see on tour. We're competing against them, you know, Freddie Rombanis and James Watson. So, you know, we were in Mexico with those guys going head to head. So, you know, they came up to here and fished. Team USA came up to fish in Cornwall and St. Francis, and Team Canada took gold. And it was pretty cool. You know, it's pretty it's a pretty nice feeling to be able to do something you love. Like I was just a scrawny kid that liked to ride his bike to the creek to go fishing. Like that was my fun growing up. And you know, there was a lot of naysayers when I came up. People said you can't make a living fishing, and you can't, you know. And I went after a guide business. I work in tourism, and I compete. And I literally, just before this show started, Andrew, I was on a Zoom call with 50 other professionals that are fishing in the Canadian Open on Lake Simcoe in 2 weeks. So, wow. Yeah, Corey and Chris Johnson, Bob Izumi, Brian Hughes, Cal Clemson, Scotty Mearson, Mike Laughlin, like some of the best games in the sport in Canada were in the meeting. And, you know, we're all going to face off in a pro-am format, minus the amateurs. We can't do that because of the social distancing rules this year. But so if you guys want to follow something really cool, next weekend is the Canadian Open of Fishing, and it's hosted by the Canadian Pro Bass Tour, the CSFL, and Andy Pilata is a huge supporter of Ontario Fishing Club and Bass Freaks and all the other fishing freaks out there. And that's where all the guys are going to be. All the top dogs are going to be at Sybil Provincial Park chasing down that title. So I hope fishing makes it internationally. I mean, it's growing. We're competing against teams from Portugal and South Africa. I fished against a bass fishing team from Zimbabwe. Like there's bass fishing all over the world. So it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds. It may not happen in my lifetime. It might. I don't know. I'm going to keep doing my part.
Now, one of my questions was, how did you find your way into getting into tournament fishing?
How did I find my way into tournament fishing? Oh man, that's pretty interesting. I think it was just kind of by dumb luck. By dumb luck, I was 20 years old or 21 years old, and I went to this Toronto Sportsman show, and I bought a boat. And it was a 16.5-foot low with a 60-horse Mercury and a trolling motor and a fish finder and a casting deck. And it was a pretty sweet little ride. Actually, I fished out of that boat for a few years when I started, and I cashed a lot of paychecks. So I had known about tournament fishing. I knew that there was tournaments that happened. There was walleye tournaments and pike tournaments and bass fishing tournaments. So I remember that first year I owned the boat. I asked a friend. I said, "Hey, there's a walleye tournament that's happening on Sturgeon Lake. Do you want to do it with me?" And he said, "Sure. I know how to catch walleye on Sturgeon Lake." So we lined up and blasted off against all these big 20-foot bass boats and ran down the lake. And he took me to his secret spot, and we caught one fish all day, and it was a 6.5-pound walleye. And then from there on, I was hooked. I got an information pamphlet for 2 different series at the time. There was three series at the time. There was the CSFL, Competitive Sport Fishing League, who I've been a monstrous supporter of for almost my whole career. Then there was the Canadian Fishing Tour, and then there was Top Bass. Those were kind of the 3 organizations, right? Top Bass was a very competitive series, but it had more of it was kind of it felt more like an entry level series. It had a lot of great anglers competing.
Oh, okay.
CSFL at the time had the Canadian Pro Tour, had the Canadian Open, and it was like there was a lot of prestige. Like when you fished those tournaments, you fished against guys like Bob Izumi, and you fished against guys like Rocky Crawford and Mike Miller, and some of the guys we see on TV now, right? JP DeRose, and the cool thing back then was the CFT moved around a lot. So they do lakes like Georgian Bay, and Top Bass was very, very just Kawartha body of water, and Top Bass doesn't operate anymore, which is too bad because I always thought it was a great series. I knew the owner really well, Ted Galoni, and if you ever saw this video, I hope he's doing well. And then it just evolved, right? The Canadian Fishing Tour was another great tour that it unfortunately was, mismanaged, and it just it ceased to exist. And then you've got all the clubs, and you've got the Canadian Bass Angler Federation, and you've got the OBN, Ontario Bass Nation, and then you've got all the independent clubs and stuff. So it's pretty interesting. It kind of grew, and I've bounced around and fished a few tournaments here and there, and then I've done some series. I've made some classics. I've cashed a bunch of checks, and I went. I've been in a club. I've done everything, and I will tell you, I went through some lean years with competitive fishing. I had some personal stuff come up in my life, and some matters of the heart, and fishing kind of took a back seat in my life. So there was the better part of 5 or 6 years where I wasn't in a really competitive place, and then I met my wife Linda, and my whole life changed. As a matter of fact, our first big date with my wife was the day I went to pick up my first Ranger bass boat, and I was given a spot on the Ranger Pro staff. I got a sponsorship deal with Ranger Boats, and so I went to pick the boat up, and then I went to a Brad Paisley concert with my soon-to-be wife, and I went through those lean, dark years, and it's like people go through struggles in life, and I had to go through mine, and I came out of it on top, and now I have an opportunity to fish on both sides of the border and compete for my country, and I go fish some of the FLW stuff in the U.S., and next year we're scheduled to fish all the Bassmaster Open, so we'll see what happens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it should be fun. So I guess what I was rambling on about was there, if you want to be a competitive angler, if you want to fish tournaments, just make sure your life's in good order, and you're not skipping out on responsibilities, and make sure it's about fun, right? Because the unfortunate side of it is I've seen a lot of guys that that fish way too many tournaments, and as a direct result of it, you don't see them anymore, and unfortunately, it's just like any other sport or any other kind of thing. Like it can little too much of one thing is never a good idea.
Yeah. Jamie comment. What is your home lake or lake you grew up fishing? Any interesting stories?
Um, yeah. So right now I live just on the outskirts of Buteley. We just bought a couple acres and moved out here, and I guess you say Rice Lake would be my home lake. But the lake I grew up fishing was I'll give you two stories. The lake I grew up fishing was Lake Dalrymple, and my uncle Bob was the big fisherman in the family. He had, you know, one of the first trolling motors ever designed and built for a boat, and he still lives there today, and he still bass fishes. He's got a little Skeeter bass boat, so he was a big influence. And my cousin Jamie was older than me. He was a big influence on fishing, and I kind of took it to a different level. And it's actually I like to call it my fishing problem is they're responsible for it. So we were fishing. My uncle Bob says to me, it's like November, like freezing cold, snowing. He says, let's go musky fishing. So I said, sure, okay. This was before like this guy, tournament fishing pro angler Joe Ford. This was like just, jump in the boat with my Uncle Bob and my fishing pole and go musky fishing. So I said, what time you want to go? He says, well, let's get out at sundown and we'll fish into the dark. I'm like, okay. So I went to the tackle store and I got these big foam bobbers with lights on the top of them, and I got these great big 12-inch sucker minnows, and we rigged them up with these big heavyweight live bait rigs, and we went out, sat in this boat, and it's freezing cold. The lake was flat, calm, and I remember when I was a kid, I used to hear this story about this great big muskie that lived on Lake Dalrymple, that it was so old it had moss growing on its back, which was probably a bunch of BS. But I can remember sitting there, and something jumped in front of the boat, and something was being chased in front of the boat, and it sounded like somebody, when this fish slapped, it sounded like somebody threw a friggin' patio stone on the water. It was that loud. And we sat there watching these bobbers in the dark, and we watched both of these bobbers swim back to the boat. And I'll never forget that. Both of these bobbers swam back to the boat, and the big sucker minnows went up under the boat for cover. So they were scared of something. I always thought that was pretty interesting. And I had another one about Rice Lake, but I can't remember what it is right away. So
That is one of my favorite lakes to fish, is Rice Lake.
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That's where I caught my first muskie.
Oh boy, right on.
It was out in November, birthday weekend, and we were out fishing for walleye, trolling in the Bewdley side, and going in and thought I hit a weed. So I still set the hook and started reeling in, and next thing I noticed, my line was going out. And next thing was a nice fight on the hands, and I got it all on video. Not sure not sure how big the muskie was. I know it was probably over 40 inches, but she was a nice fat one too.
Well done, buddy. That's awesome.
And did my first fishing tournament up on Rice Lake as well.
Nice. Which one was that?
That was for the Ontario Fishing Club. They had a charity one last year.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, so Jeff got me into that one and took me up. And I fished with him during the morning. Then during the afternoon, I was on another boat with a guy named Tyler Brooks and someone else named Ryan Campbell. And we were out fishing during the afternoon together and caught my first smallmouth up there, but came in at 2 pounds, 11 ounces, and caught my 2.33 pound largemouth up there.
Very cool.
And Rice Lake still holds my PB for largemouth, which is 3 pounds.
Good man. That's awesome. Great fish. Next time you talk to Tyler Brooks, ask him about the muskie that I caught when he was with me.
I will do. Steve Shaw comment. Truthfully, Florida's sting buckets or Lake Ontario smallmouth, which get you fired up more?
Both. Sorry, Steve, that's a loaded question. Until you've caught a 10-pounder on a big 8-inch swim bait on a reservoir in Texas, or you've caught a 7+ pound smallmouth on the Great Lakes, it's like trying to compare apples and oranges. I mean, they're both great. It's really tough to pick it out. However, I will say this. Those southern reservoirs, like, they're great. We see, YouTube's full of videos on Okeechobee, and Florida strain bass have been introduced to reservoirs all over the central and Midwest areas, and they grow really fast, they grow big, and they're a lot of fun to catch. That being said, the window of opportunity to catch those fish is very small in a lot of those states. Like, you catch them, I know in Texas, in the spring they start to move into the creeks to spawn, and then you can catch them on the bank, you can catch them on a frog, you can catch them on a bed, when they're coming in and they're going out, you can catch them on points, and they're usually pretty big. You can catch wolf packs of big females, but once that spawns over and those fish have transitioned, and once the days get too hot, what happens is there's a thermocline that happens. So the top of the water, the oxygen gets sucked out of the water column because it's too hot. So all those fish cool up and go deep, and they're very hard to catch. Like, you don't want to be traveling to one of those southern places in July or August, which is amazing because we've got, that's giving you like a, anywhere from 3 to 5 month window to really have some awesome fishing time, right? January, February, Florida can be amazing. January, February, the numbers aren't that good in Texas, but as you get into the warmer months, because Texas is still pretty cold in the winter, as it starts to warm up into March, April, and May, when the spawn starts to happen, then it gets really exciting. But when it starts to slow down, it really slows down, which I guess in a roundabout way is the equivalent to our lakes freezing and us not being able to fish. But we don't get to fish, in a lot of areas, we don't really get to fish around the spawn because we have our season set in a way that kind of protects the majority of the spawn. Sometimes on the Great Lakes, you can catch smallmouth on beds and, that kind of deal. But, we've got really, for all intents and purposes, June or half of June, July, August, September, October, November, even right up now into December 15th, you can go out and catch giant smallmouth in places that's still open. So, we've got a great season. We've got fish that don't get to see lures all year. We've got more water than any country on earth to go explore. So, if I were to tell anybody one thing, and if you're just a fun recreational fisherman or fisherwoman, go explore, go have some fun. Get out of your comfort zone. It doesn't always have to be the Rice Lake, the Skuhog, the Pigeon, the Buckhorn. I mean, there's lakes all over, the North Kawarthas, the Halliburton Highlands, Minden area, Norton Bay region, like Trent, down towards the Bay of Quinte, and Land of Lakes region's got thousands of lakes that are fishable, and you don't really need, you can go fish from shore, you can put a canoe in, you can find a spot, put a canoe in with your camping gear, and go fishing and camp on the same lake you're fishing on for free. Just leave it how you found it, and that's the beauty of living where we're living. Yeah.
Chris is asking, when was the last time you fished Lake Couchiching?
Last year on opening weekend, we fished the Casey Cup. It's amazing how big the fish are getting there. We caught 18 pounds for 5 bass, and in any other year that probably would have cashed a check, but for whatever reason that was good for 25th place last year. Wow. Giant bass being caught. So yeah, that was the last time I fished Couchiching.
And
My buddy Moose. What do you think, Andrew? Doesn't Moose look so much more handsome with his beard growing back?
Yes, he does.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he?
He does. Looks much more.
Moose just cut me some vinyl for my truck wrap. We had to do put some new graphics on it. So, any of you guys want a guy to cut some vinyl and make some decals and do all that stuff? Moose is your man. Co-founder of the Ontario Fishing Club, all around good guy, ambassador, and one handsome son of a gun.
Yes. Steve Shaw comment. Any thoughts on early open discussion for Lake Ontario bass?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm lost, Steve. That's a really, really good question. So there's been a proposal put into the government for a couple different options that pertain to the bass fishing season on Lake Ontario. Now, the interesting thing is, Bruce Tufts at the Tufts Labs in Queen's University has proposed this to the government that we have a catch and release season. It's been a while since I read the document, but my understanding it was a catch and one of the options was a catch and release season in May, and then the season would be off limits during the spawn, and then it would open up again in July 1st. I think they were going to open it up. That was one option. That's a really tough one for me because I work in tourism, so the majority of my business is on Lake Ontario chasing trophy smallmouth. So I understand protecting the fish. There's a lot of people that don't practice good conservation like some of us, but they are within their legal rights to catch and keep fish. So when we have high water and we have like a really late spring, what happens is it pushes the spawn. Like last year was a very, very rare year where the spawn, there was fish on spawning beds in August. So when you have situations like that, the fishery really can potentially be damaged with people catching fish on beds, and that's the theory. That's the working theory behind why they want to postpone fishing. But from a tourism perspective, there's a lot of business owners and motels and lodges and cottage resorts and little mom and pop shops that rent out boats and cottages all along that St. Lawrence River and Lake Ontario for people that really look forward to going bass fishing. So if the season, closes between I think it was like April 15th to July 1st, in and around that range, right? Which kind of takes the whole June fishing out of the equation. I think that was the dates. You'd have to, all the information's online. There was two options that they proposed to the government, but at first I thought this is a great idea, and I shared it to protect the fishery. But then I spoke to another one of my peers, and he called me and he says, did you look at this side of it? The tourism impact and how it'll impact your business and how it will impact, could you imagine not being able to bass fish on Lake Ontario for a year? So now what they really, really need to do is look at how the state of Texas regulates their big bass fishing. Honest to goodness, it's the greatest. During the spawn, they have a catch and release season. Catch a fish, it goes right back in the water. And
wow.
That's because they have a slot size, Andrew. So a fish that's between 16 and 24 inches has to go back. But every Texan with a Texas state fishing license is allowed to keep 1 over 24 inches. And that's just to protect people's rights and freedoms if they were to catch a trophy of a lifetime. If they were to catch that 12-pounder, right? Yeah. Most bass fishermen would put that back in the water. Most bass fishermen would practice good conservation and put it in. But there's people that, I tell you what, I fish with, 600 people every year. And the old guard is still there. And there's still people that grew up believing that I'm going to eat the big one and let the little ones grow up, which in bass fishing is the complete opposite, right? The big ones are the females. The lakes need them to survive. But if we had a catch and release season, it would stimulate the economy. It would grow the sport. It would allow bass fishermen that have massive, massive investments to be able to go and enjoy their investments on lakes in the spring. You know, could you imagine being able to go bass fishing in April and June?
I would love it.
That'd be amazing.
Love it.
Imagine catching pre-spawn, schooling pre-spawn fish. No bass fisherman in Canada that's never traveled to the U.S. in the spring would even have the slightest idea what that's like. You know, all those times you were walleye fishing and you set the hook into a giant largemouth bass on a weed line in April, you're like, whoa, where did this thing come from? Now imagine you could take a picture of that fish and then release it right then and there. And I honestly think that we need to have some kind of slot system put in place. Like I've seen the benefits a slot has had on reservoirs in the U.S., you know, and I've seen how tournaments have been able to adapt around the slot. Like they could never have a major bass fishing tournament on Lake Fork for years. The Elite Series couldn't go there because in order to bring your fish up on stage, most of those fish are going to be in that 16 to 24 inches. But now with live weigh-ins and social media and having an official on the boat to weigh your fish for you, the Elite Series has got to go to Fork. You know, we got to watch Corey and Chris Johnson fish Lake Fork. We got to watch, you know, Scott Canterbury and all the pros and Brandon Cobb. You know, we got to watch them at Fork, and we never got to do that before because it was a very, very well managed and protected reservoir. So, you know, it's interesting, and I know I'm comparing largemouth reservoir fishing to smallmouth, but I'm going to tell you guys, whoever's watching, this is the most important thing. This place is in our backyard, Lake Ontario. So when when I ask people this all the time, when you think of a trophy bass fishing destination, if you were to go on vacation, you know what, Andrew? I'm going to ask you right now. If the winter time or the spring came and you were going to travel to go bass fishing, what's the first lake that pops into mind where I want to go catch trophy bass?
Best trophy bass where I would go would probably be up.
No. Now listen, you're traveling, right? You're going on a destination somewhere. You're going on vacation somewhere in the winter time or the spring.
Alabama, perfect.
Okay, so that would be a bucket list trip, right? Go to Gunnersville or go to Okeechobee. For guys like us, that's like our dream because we see it on TV. We see Scott Martin catching the 10-pounder in Okeechobee, you know. We see the guys catching giants on Amistad and Falcon. You know where those guys dream about going fishing in the summertime? You know where their bucket list is? Lake Ontario, St. Lawrence River. And we don't have enough friggin' smarts here as a community to recognize that that's a trophy fishery that's sought after by people all over the world. Like, I talk to guys from South Africa and they're like, man, you fished the St. Lawrence River for smallmouth? Oh my God. Like that's I fish with people from Japan, people from Australia, people from Great Britain, people from all over the US. Because when it's 120 degrees in Arizona and the guys want to go away for a week to catch bass in 85, 90-degree weather, they want to come up here and catch 6-pound smallmouth on Lake Ontario. So, you know, it's one of the greatest fisheries in the world, you know, and we really need to protect it. So,
Moose comment. Tell us about the giant fish last year.
Oh, the one that had me shaking to my core. So I've been fishing around this area on Lake Simcoe. I'm going to tell you guys something about Lake Simcoe. I believe, I could be wrong. It might happen on Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, might happen on Lake Ontario, but I truly believe the next world record smallmouth is coming out of Lake Simcoe. It's such a big, small lake that has bait fish like the Great Lakes. There's packs in the summer and in the fall. There's packs of 6 and 8 pounders that just roam around in 20 to 50 feet of water chasing bait. It's all they do. They follow all the shad, all the different species of shad, and they follow the perch and they just eat. So I started seeing all these big fish in these areas. You know, you go to a tournament, you go to Canadian Open, and it's like 25 pounds a day. You know, you're lucky to win. it's that kind of fishery. And over the years, there's been several 8-pounders caught. You know, the record 5-fish limit came out of Simcoe. It was like 32 pounds for 5 fish in the fall. So to put it into perspective, there's some gigantic smallmouth on Simcoe. So last year, I was fishing a rock line. It was like a sand rock transition. It was super flat. I wasn't seeing a lot of fish shallow that I normally see. And when you do that and the sun's up high and you can see everything because the water's so clear, you start to sight fish really, really big fish. And I'm on this rock line. It's really flat and calm. And I thought, man, I got to get my bait away from the boat. So I bombed a 2.5 set the hook. Remember this, guys, a 2.5 set the hook tube in 10 to 12 feet of water on a rock line. It was sand rock transition. And the tube color was Star Wars. It was a smoke tube with purple and black. And I was pulling it along this rock line, nice and slow. Yeah, the tube is called Star Wars. Go to AmericanBaitWorks.com, look through the baits for the Set the Hook products, and you'll see all the baits there. I know Sail carries them, Peterborough Pro Tackle carries them. Go on up and see Warren and the guys. They're amazing. There's a lot of retailers. It's a Canadian-owned and operated company owned by Peter Savoya, one of our Canadian tournament fishing legends. And she tightened up, and I knew there was a fish on, so I leaned into it and set the hook. Now, remember, you don't set the hook too hard, but hard enough to get that hook stuck. But I had 8-pound braid and an 8-pound fluoro leader. And this fish comes to the boat. The scary thing was, as I could see this fish coming up in 10 feet of water, another one showed up underneath of it that was bigger. There was another fish that was blacker and longer than this fish underneath of it. And I got this fish coming up, and I said to the guy in the boat with me, I said, man, there's another one there. Get your drop shot or something and throw it down on that fish. And so he scrambles and he picks a rod up and he drops it down. And then my fish comes up to 5 feet of water. And now I can see how big it is. And it rolls over on its side. And I'm like, oh my God, dude, get the net right now. Get the net. And then she started to dog a few times. And when she hit the net, I was like, my God, I think that might be the biggest smallmouth I've ever caught in my life. But it was weird. It looked like it had the body of a 5-pounder. This fish was 21 and a half inches long. And it was 22 and a half inches around. And this was in the beginning of July. So this wasn't even like one of those big fat fall fish. And she was squeezing out crawfish guts from every hole in her body. So she went in the live well for some oxygen, some G juice. I was trembling. My phone went off. I got a text message from Phil Haggerty. Now, you gotta remember, I'm on Lake Simcoe in the middle of nowhere. Phil Haggerty is one of my friends that fishes on Team Canada with me. And Phil says in his text message, get off my spot. So right away I know he's joking. But I look around, and I don't see a boat for miles and miles. And I called him, and he answered, and I said, oh, my God, Phil, where are you right now? He says, I just launched the boat. I saw your truck in the parking lot, so I thought I'd text you. I said, you got to come over and meet me. I'm right here. Come on over and meet me. I got to show you something. And he was with his son, Stephen Haggerty. And Stephen videotaped the fish being released, and we weighed it again, and it was 7 pounds, 15 ounces. And she spit up about an ounce worth of crawfish, so it's pretty safe. It was pretty safe bet that was about an 8-pound smallmouth. She was just a freak of nature giant of a fish. So yeah, it's on my Facebook page, Joe Ford Fishing, and it was a lot of fun. Thanks for asking that question, Moose, because I don't know if that was the giant you were talking about. I caught a 52-inch musky last year when I was fishing with Tyler Brooks and Mark Elbeck on Sturgeon Lake.
Oh, I know Mark Elbeck.
Yeah, so
that is great. Yeah. Wow. Well, time's run out. We got 3 minutes left. Thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. And next time when I'm up at Rice Lake, I think I might have to hit you up and go do some fishing together.
Give me a shout, buddy. Let me know if you're coming around this way. If I have the time, we maybe go throw a frog for a couple hours.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure to have you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Keep doing what you're doing, buddy.
Thank
Don't
you.
stop.
Oh, I won't.
Right on.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you guys for tuning in tonight. That is the show. I'll be taking my summer break, so the show will be returning summer back in September. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the 10 shows I've done so far. But I'm going to be taking my summer break and going to be going out and doing a lot of fishing. So thank you guys for tuning in tonight. It was a pleasure to have Joey Ford on the show and learn a little bit about him. So I'll see you guys all later. Tight lines, and till then, have a good day, and I'll talk to you guys all later. Tight lines, everyone.